Okay, so this is the color scheme. I've printed them out on half sheets of paper so you can have that in front of you while you're still deciding what palette you want to use. But I'm going to use one of the split complementaries. I'm using the green, red, orange, red, violet. When you're choosing these colors, you have to keep in mind that you can add white to them, you can add black to them, and you can add them to each other. Once you have everything outlined and you've had me check it, then you can start with something called color notes. That's where you get the gist of things so you know what colors are going to go where. This process works exactly like the tick mark exercise. You're swooping in there, doing 1, 2 brush strokes, and then getting out and changing your color or your hue on your brush. So for this, I know that looks black. It's not. It has a little bit of black in it, but it's really green and violet and a tiny bit of blue in there. And I want that background to be an ombre because I know that if I make an ombre in the background, it's going to give a sense of depth. And I want to give a shallow sense of depth with this. Now, that said, on the background, you can do what you want to the background. You can come up with your own design as long as you are in line with the color scheme. So in my background, it's hard to see it, but I outlined flowers. I looked at a picture and I outlined, I think there's 3 or 4 flowers there. So there's going to be flowers in the background, kind of like wallpaper, but also 3D wallpaper. Goal with this is that you're not trying to cover every bit of white paper for now, but you are trying to get a basic overall plan for what colors are going to go where, and the shift that occurs with value and temperature. We're going to be talking about temperature in the future real soon. It refers to how a color looks, if it looks warm or if it looks cool. Here's where I'm going into the flowers. So the flowers are going to fall into that red-violet because that's part of my color scheme is red-violet. But I can make the red-violet a little bit more purpley in the shadows. I can also take a little bit of orange to the red-violet. Like with the tick mark exercise, I don't want to keep using the same color over and over again in an area. I want to change it. So I want to get a different color note. So I'm slightly adjusting these marks that I'm making. And I am, like on the flowers, I'm trying to curve my stroke to mimic the shadow shape of the petals there. So you can try and wrap or curve your strokes so they don't all have to be vertical or angled. You want to think about wrapping your stroke around the form that you're trying to portray. So far, I'm using predominantly red, violet, and green. So if you remember, the complements of red is green. So this is pretty close, red, violet, and green here. And I am using a little bit of blue-green. I'm doing that for the leaves. There's a few leaves that are behind that flower. I am deliberately putting a leaf that is coming out of the background and overlapping onto the foreground. That's intentional just to play with the idea of depth and to have a little bit of fun with it. And these are different colors. I know they all look dark on the screen, but they're slightly different. So far, I've only addressed the backgrounds, but now you can see me going in for the cone. So on the cone, I'm trying to make the cone look kind of like a coral color. So you have to think, what does a coral color object look in shadow? What are the colors that you're going to use? And I like to avoid using black. I prefer to use other colors to darken a hue other than black. So I'm using like red violet on there for the shadow side. And I'm taking red orange and maybe adding a little bit of blue to it. And I'm not getting this perfect because if you look at the cone photo, which I was doing, there's a photo of the cone up there. It is darker towards the tip, and as it gets towards the base of the cone, it actually lightens. So if you are looking at each individual stripe, it's darker at the top and fades slightly as it goes to the bottom. I'm not quite getting that here, and that's okay. But I do need to sort of suggest the value shift. And you can see I'm not painting everything. It's almost like I'm doing these little spots on the cone, and it does look a little bit spotty. Now this style of painting is called impressionistic, but it's also kind of expressionistic too. So it's a way to express an idea, and it's going to make your painting style appear really lively, and there's going to be a lot for the viewer to look at. It's not going to be flat if you do it this way, and it won't be boring. And that's one of your jobs as a painter, is to make something that's interesting and captivating your viewer. Later on, your job is also to provoke or give an idea. So you can see I'm going in there and I'm getting a ombre. You can see it go from, there's like a darker band on that cone, and then it shifts into light. I also added yellow to it, so I got a peachy kind of hue. And then I'm going in there to that cast shadow. When I'm doing the cast shadow, I'm doing kind of a hatch line, and I'm intentionally leaving gaps in between my stroke because I don't want to create a hard edge there. And I'm letting my shadow itself try and making that a little bit soft, because I don't want it to be too sharp. If it's too sharp, then it's going to be flat. And I want to remind you on the shadow, it's important that you start off dark at the base of the object, and then as the shadow moves away from the form, it gets a little bit lighter in color. And the cast shadow also needs to take on a little bit of the color of the foreground, so whatever it's sitting on, whatever the object is sitting on. So I intentionally put some green in mine and some blue in there so that it would take on that local color of that foreground. And then I'm going for a sage green because I like sage green. I think it's a great color. And remember, it's an ombre even in the foreground. It's darker in the back and it's lighter in the front in this picture. What you want to avoid is a lot of strokes that are exactly the same value, the same note. You want to change it up. So you can add white to change up the color. In this case, I'm adding add a tiny bit of yellow to that green, something to give it a little bit of something else. And this is to give a suggestion. With this type of painting, it requires layers. So this is not anywhere close to being finished. It's going to have multiple layers stacked on one on top of the other. You're going to build up the paint until you create an opaque surface. So this is just the beginning.